Police dog storms the cockpit, and the truth comes out. No one understood what was happening. A canine suddenly broke protocol, charging straight into the cockpit right before takeoff. The pilot panicked. The security officer froze. Only his handler, a former Special Forces soldier, sensed that something was off. Why would such a seasoned dog react like that? What had it sensed that no one else did? And when it comes down to it, would you trust instinct or procedure? If you've ever believed dogs aren't just pets, but beings that understand things in ways humans can't explain, then you're exactly where you need to be. This story begins on a foggy morning, with a feeling that just couldn't be ignored. Pale yellow lights cut through the thin fog covering runway 6 at Bridgemont Airport, Oregon. It was still dark. The early winter wind bit through the protective jackets of the graveyard shift crew. A Boeing 737 sat still, its cockpit light faintly glowing in the night, prepped for a flight that had never been publicly listed. No one could have predicted that, just minutes later, the silence would be shattered by a single bark. Axel, a German shepherd with the elite canine security unit, wasn't the type to lose control. In 5 years of service alongside Officer Ethan Rowe, he had never broken protocol. Not once. But that morning, before a single passenger had stepped on board, Axel did something unprecedented. He charged straight for the cockpit, a leap without command, a shove that blew open the barely cracked door, a low, loud, steady bark, the only sound in the sealed cabin, and it rang out like a warning. "Axel, stand down," Ethan shouted, his hand gripping the leash tight. But the dog didn't move. His eyes were locked on the left wall of the cockpit, where a small maintenance panel sat, one that usually got overlooked during standard checks. Captain Emery Halden froze. "What's going on? What's wrong with that dog?" he muttered, glancing quickly between the K9 and the officer, now stepping into the cockpit. "I don't know, but I've never seen him react like this," Ethan said, his voice dropping, hand instinctively brushing the holstered gun at his side. Outside, murmurs started spreading among the security staff. This wasn't just any flight. It was under special protection, tied to a high-level federal witness. And now, something was going sideways right before takeoff. In just a few minutes, the aircraft door was set to close. There was no room for mistakes. But Axel wasn't concerned about time. He kept moving forward, nose inches from the metal panel, breathing fast, back arched, his whole body on high alert. Captain Halden tightened his grip on the folder in his hands, eyes flicking to the cockpit clock. "I need this plane in the air within 30 minutes. We can't delay over some unusual reaction from a dog." Ethan didn't respond. He just crouched down, gently placing a hand on Axel's head. The dog didn't flinch. His eyes stayed locked on the suspicious spot. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't the scent of leftover food. This was a warrior's response, the same instinct that had once saved Ethan's life 3 years ago on the Afghan border. And now that same instinct was back, right here on American soil, in the cockpit of a flight that was supposed to be completely secure. No one said another word. Time felt frozen inside the narrow cabin. Ethan knew if he didn't make a decision soon, things could spiral out of control. But in that moment, he realized, some things don't need a clear reason. Sometimes all you need is trust. And he trusted Axel. Blind or not, that would be proven in just a few minutes. The familiar scent of metal and synthetic plastic still lingered in Ethan's mind as he backed out of the aircraft. He gripped the leash tightly, feeling the heat of Axel's body through his hand. They'd only just stepped out of the cockpit minutes ago, but something already felt different. Something was coming. He didn't know what, but his dog did. Axel had been trained to detect explosives, hidden humans, non-metallic weapons, even abnormal stress patterns from people with harmful intent. And not once, in 5 years of service, had he ever been wrong. They met at a training center in Texas. Back then, Ethan had just left Special Forces after a failed mission that cost a teammate's life. He'd been reassigned to the airport's K9 security unit, what people called a more stable, lower-risk job. The only thing he found stable was the steady footfalls and focused stare of a dog named Axel, a large, unnervingly calm German shepherd. No one on the team understood why Axel had been trained to respond to near-silent commands and hand signals instead of standard voice cues. Ethan only had to tilt his head slightly or give a tiny tug of his wrist, and Axel knew exactly what to do. They didn't need words to communicate. Once, during a simulated explosives detection drill, Axel ignored every decoy box the other dogs flagged and walked straight to a backpack that wasn't even part of the test. Inside was a real sample of explosive that had been mistakenly placed there. If that had been a normal day, there's a good chance no one would have caught it before the flight took off. From that moment on, Ethan knew this dog wasn't just a tool for the job. He was a partner. The only thing left in Ethan's world that still felt solid when everything else seemed too fragile to trust. Unlike the other dogs on the team, Axel never cared about treats. He didn't enjoy being petted or spoken to in a sweet voice. The only thing that ever got a real reaction from him was when Ethan said, "Good job, my friend." It sounded silly, maybe, but every time Ethan said those words, Axel's ears would lower, and his eyes would light up with something that looked almost like emotion. And this morning when Axel burst into the cockpit, no command, no hesitation, ignoring superior officers and shouted orders, Ethan didn't need proof. There was only one reason this dog would act that way. He knew something was wrong. Axel couldn't talk. He couldn't file a report. He didn't have the authority to call for a technical inspection. But Ethan did, and he was going to use it, not for protocol, but for trust. Because sometimes in a world full of noise and fake signals, the only ones still holding on to the truth are the ones who can't speak. Ethan sat in a small conference room behind the airport security office. On the screen in front of him, a 3D map displayed the internal transport route from the secure holding area to the plane's boarding stairs. Sitting next to him was Federal Agent Jenna Monroe, who had flown in overnight from D.C. to oversee the entire witness transfer operation. The witness was Darren Knox, former CFO of a transnational weapons smuggling organization. For 16 years, Knox ran a complex money laundering network spanning 3 countries, all under the guise of investment consulting firms. That is, until 6 months ago, when he voluntarily turned himself in. But Knox's change of heart wasn't about conscience. One of the final shipments he facilitated had indirectly led to the death of an innocent family in Texas, and he knew if he stayed silent, he'd be next on the hit list. Cooperating with the government wasn't just his only option. It was his last shot at staying alive. The problem was, the organization Knox once served had a network deep enough to plant people inside law enforcement. No one knew whose identity might still be compromised. The flight and transfer route were encrypted, changed at the last minute. Fewer than 10 people knew the full plan. Ethan was one of them. "You and your dog," Jenna said, her voice flat and emotionless, "will lead the escort from the security station to the plane. You're to stay with the witness from the moment he leaves the holding area until wheels up." Ethan nodded, eyes locked on the map. The route looked simple enough, but one wrong person showing up at the wrong time could bring it all crashing down. "We're putting the entire case on Knox's testimony," Jenna went on. "If he's not in that courtroom by 9 a.m. tomorrow in Seattle, it's not just him that dies. The case collapses, and the federal security system takes a hit it may never recover from." The last sentence hit like lead. Ethan knew he wasn't just protecting a man. He was protecting a rare shot at justice, clawing back a piece of what was lost. Knox was brought out of isolation at 5:52 a.m. Thin, pale, his wrists locked in high-security magnetic cuffs. His eyes darted constantly, like he could feel someone watching. But the only one truly locked onto him was Axel. Walking a few steps ahead, his gait smooth but razor-sharp. An armored vehicle waited just outside on the maintenance ramp. From there to the aircraft stairs, it would take less than 3 minutes. But on a mission like this, 3 minutes could last forever. As Knox stepped onto the metal stairway leading into the plane, a strong gust ripped across the runway. Ethan could feel the pressure building, not from the weather but from something less visible. Time, risk, fear. And the strange silence coming from the dog at his side. Axel wasn't barking, he wasn't pulling at the leash, but his ears were up, alert, and his steps had started to slow. Something in the air made him hesitate, and this time, Ethan felt it too, like a chill running straight down his spine. The plane was still empty. No passengers had boarded yet. The crew had been thoroughly vetted. Security was posted at both ends of the stairway. Everything should have been locked down, airtight. So if that was true, why was Axel slowing down? The wind whistled through the metal gaps of the boarding stairs. Early morning light had started to creep through the low cloud cover, casting a cold silver sheen over the body of the Boeing. Ethan slowed his steps. He didn't signal, but Axel, always half a step ahead, came to a full stop. He turned his head, eyes locked on the still-shut cockpit door. No sound came from that direction, but Ethan saw it. Axel's body was taut, every muscle tight. No growl, no sudden movement, just a terrifying kind of stillness, the kind only survivors of combat would recognize. "What is it, my friend?" Ethan asked under his breath, tightening his grip slightly on the leash. Axel didn't respond. He was listening. The cabin was empty. The crew had finished their pre-flight checks and were now in the maintenance area. Knox had been brought on board first and was seated in first class, just feet from the cockpit. No other passengers had boarded. On paper, there was no reason to suspect a thing. But Axel didn't agree. The dog suddenly veered off, ignoring the center aisle and heading straight toward the front of the plane. His body dropped low, nose sweeping slowly along the seam between the bulkhead and the cabin floor. When he reached the cockpit door, he stopped. No bark, just a tilt of the head, and a deep, steady breath. Ethan frowned. This wasn't standard protocol, not even close, but he recognized it. This was exactly how Axel had once detected a homemade bomb hidden in the seat compartment of a truck near the border 3 years ago. A repeat response. Not loud, not obvious, but never wrong. He knocked on the cockpit door twice. It opened a second later. Captain Halden looked at Ethan, visibly impatient. "Is there a problem?" he asked. Ethan kept his voice calm. "I need to bring Axel in to sweep the cockpit one more time. Final clearance check before takeoff." Halden shook his head slightly, dark circles under his eyes from lack of sleep. "We've already been checked 3 times since last night. The aircraft's sealed. We're running tight on schedule. We don't have time. And we won't get a second chance if something slips through," Ethan replied, calm but firm. "He's alerting." The captain glanced at Axel. The dog was still, but his eyes were locked onto a single spot on the cockpit wall, just behind the co-pilot's seat, where a small steel maintenance panel was mounted. A section nobody ever really noticed on commercial flights. "You've got 2 minutes, Halden said, reluctantly. "But if there's nothing, I'm calling it in. We proceed as scheduled." Ethan nodded and unclipped the leash. Axel stepped into the cockpit with the silence of a storm not yet broken. He circled the seat, nose inches from the floor, then stopped in front of the panel. One more deep breath, and then a low whine. Ethan froze. That sound, a soft whine, was rare. It only came up during training, when Axel detected the scent of a live human hidden in an enclosed space. Not explosives, not foreign objects, a person. He crouched down, running his fingers along the edge of the panel. No scratches, no signs of tampering. But when he lightly touched one of the screws, he felt it, warm. Someone had touched this, not long ago. "Captain," Ethan said, not turning his head, "we need to open this panel, right now." Halden hesitated, but in that instant Axel took a step back and let out a low growl, sharp, cold, final, and Ethan knew this wasn't just a signal anymore. This was the last warning. The moment that growl cut through the air, the cockpit seemed to drop a few degrees colder. Captain Halden stood still, eyes shifting from Ethan to the dog. His pupils widened for a split second, that flash of realization Ethan had seen before in people who'd witnessed a canine's true reaction. "You're telling me," Halden said slowly, his voice unsteady, "your dog thinks there's someone hiding behind that panel?" "He doesn't think. He knows," Ethan said, his hand resting on the strap of his holstered weapon, not drawing it, yet, and he's never been wrong. A soft click echoed as the cockpit door opened. Jenna Monroe stepped in, tension written all over her face. "What's going on?" She glanced at Axel, then to Ethan. "We need to be airborne in 12 minutes if we want to hit the window for Seattle. I made it clear, no delays." The dog just alerted to a possible person inside the maintenance panel behind the co-pilot's seat, Ethan said quickly. "He doesn't react like this unless he's sure." Jenna exhaled hard. "There's been no other signals, no security alerts, no sensors tripped." "There's no sensor with a nose like Axel's," Ethan replied, eyes still locked on the panel. You know that. Captain Halden cut in. I respect what you're trying to do here, but I've got a plane that needs to move. If we don't take off in our designated slot, I lose the window. We'll be forced to reroute or worse, cancel altogether. Do you have any idea what a delayed federal flight like this costs? We're protecting a federal witness, Jenna snapped, her voice rising. If you can't guarantee absolute safety on this aircraft, then you're not qualified to fly it. Halden's jaw clenched. The only threat I see here is that dog getting in the way of me doing my job. Ethan stepped forward, placing himself between Halden and Axel. I'm not asking, I'm ordering. Under federal authority, I have the right to inspect any area if a K9 unit alerts. Agent Monroe? He turned to Jenna, eyes steady. All I need is your call. I'll open the panel now. Jenna stayed quiet for a few seconds. She looked at Axel, the dog now sitting, but his body still coiled tight, eyes locked on the metal panel like a trigger waiting to snap. She'd seen this kind of posture before, at the border, during a human trafficking raid, and not once had it been wrong. You've got 10 minutes, Jenna said, slicing through the tension in the room like a blade. No more. If nothing turns up, we take off as planned. Halden turned away in frustration but didn't say another word. Ethan looked toward the security tech waiting just outside the door. I need a removal kit. As the technician went to retrieve it, Ethan knelt beside Axel and whispered, Good job, my friend. Now, we've got to be sure. Axel exhaled softly, eyes never leaving the panel. 1 minute passed, then 2. The tools arrived. Ethan pulled off his gloves and began unscrewing the tiny bolts that held the panel in place. One by one, no one spoke. Even the internal radios had gone silent. The air was tight enough to snap. With the last screw loose, Ethan slowly pulled the panel toward him. Inside was a narrow, pitch-black cavity, tightly bundled wiring, tangled cables, but nothing else. No weapons, no visible sign of a person. Halden crossed his arms and smirked. We just wasted 8 minutes. We're not done, Ethan muttered. He angled his flashlight deeper, sweeping the back edge of the compartment. There, barely noticeable. A small spot where the silver paint looked just a bit newer. The texture didn't quite match. A faint scratch. A gap. Axel suddenly let out a whine, sharper this time, clear and clipped. A confirmation. Someone's worked on this, Ethan said. Second panel. It's not in the original design. Jenna stepped forward. You sure? As sure as Axel is. Ethan reached in and pressed gently. A soft click sounded. The inner panel cracked open slightly, just enough to reveal a dark piece of fabric. A sleeve. Back up, Ethan shouted. Axel growled and lunged like lightning. The panel dropped and a human hand shot out, followed by a choking gasp from someone trying to squeeze out of a space no person should have fit into. Time left before takeoff, less than 3 minutes. But no one cared about the schedule anymore. The cockpit felt thick with tension, like a fight had already happened, though no shots had been fired. The man discovered behind the panel was now halfway out, restrained, arms pinned behind his back with soft cuffs, his face twisted in pain. Axel sat right beside him, eyes locked, breathing slow and steady. Cold, mechanical, like a machine that only moved when it knew it was right. Ethan didn't need a case file to know this wasn't some nobody. The way the man had tucked himself into that crawl space, the discipline in staying completely silent, the nearly flawless camouflage work, this was a professional, not some street-level thug. This was the kind of ghost that only showed up in federal black files. And sure enough, when Jenna ran a quick fingerprint scan on her handheld device, the ID lit up instantly. Viktor Dreznov, Russian national, former operative for a private military contractor. Suspected in connection with 3 witness assassinations across Europe. Never charged, never caught, until now. And now he was here, on a classified flight, hidden inside a maintenance compartment, just 3 steps from witness Darren Knox. Jenna made the emergency call to HQ. Minutes later, federal security forces flooded the scene. The plane was locked down. Everyone on board was detained for questioning. As for Viktor, he was loaded into an armored vehicle. No one willing to risk him near any device, not even for a second. Inside the airport's emergency security briefing room, Jenna stood in front of the projector. An X-ray image of the maintenance compartment lit up the screen, alongside a detailed schematic. Viktor had pre-cut the panel, reattached it with magnets and soundproof padding. He'd created just enough space to hide and wait for the right moment to strike. The question is, Jenna said, scanning the room, how did he know the exact plane, the exact time, and exactly where the witness would be sitting? Ethan leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Someone leaked it. Another agent spoke up. The plan was distributed strictly by clearance level. Even the airport security team only got their brief 30 minutes ahead. Someone inside the system leaked it. Not someone who leaked it, Jenna said. Someone in the system. The room went still. Everyone knew what she meant, an insider. Someone embedded in the ranks, security, law enforcement, maybe even judiciary, who sold the information, or worse, directly coordinated the breach. The order to suspend the flight was issued immediately. Darren Knox was shifted to Plan B, military helicopter transport, off the books. A new tactical team was mobilized with anonymous stop points along the route to Seattle. Axel stayed on the mission. Ethan looked over at the dog sitting quietly in the corner of the room, eyes half closed but ears twitching with every sound. There was no applause, no medals, but everyone in that room knew, if it hadn't been for Axel, Darren would be dead, and the entire flight could have ended in disaster. "He saved all of us," Jenna said softly, standing beside Ethan, "and you held on to the one thing numbers can't measure." Ethan didn't reply. He just nodded, then looked at Axel. "Good job, my friend," he whispered. And for the first time that day, Axel's ears folded back slightly. He looked up, eyes lit with something that felt almost human. 3 days after the incident, a light snowfall drifted over Seattle. The federal compound on the city's southern outskirts stayed lit through the night, preparing for a closed-door hearing at 9 a.m. Darren Knox, under heavy protection, had arrived safely just 6 hours earlier. No newspaper ran the details. No evening broadcast mentioned his name. But behind the thick courtroom doors, the testimony of a man the world had almost forgotten was rewriting the entire case file on one of the most notorious crime syndicates in U.S. history. And somewhere else, nearly 2,000 miles away, a German shepherd lay stretched out on an old rug in the K9 office at Bridgemont Airport. Axel didn't know what was happening in that courtroom. He only knew that for the past 3 days, Ethan hadn't left his side. Ethan sat nearby, holding a cup of cold coffee. They hadn't gone back on duty yet, just a quiet pause, one both of them needed. A soft knock came at the door. It was Jenna Monroe. No uniform this time. She wore a knit coat, and her eyes had lost their usual sharp edge. "I just got back from Seattle. The hearing's done," she said. "Knox's testimony triggered 3 emergency arrest warrants this morning. 4 other top-tier bosses are now under surveillance. Their whole network is starting to crack." Ethan nodded. "What about the mole?" "Still unconfirmed, but we've locked down every access point to the witness protection database." She looked over at Axel. "We want to recommend a special commendation for him, a Medal of Valor for security support personnel." Ethan smiled. "He doesn't need a medal, just this." He pulled a worn green rubber ball from the drawer, edges frayed from years of use. Axel perked up the second he saw it, tail wagging gently. Ethan tossed it across the room. Axel caught it midair, turned back proudly, and held it tight in his mouth like that one thing made the whole world make sense. Jenna watched for a few seconds, quietly taking it in. "I don't think I've ever seen a dog change the course of an entire case. But that day, without Axel, I think we would have lost everything." Ethan didn't answer. He just reached out and gently rubbed the top of his partner's head. He did what no system could, trusted his instincts, no matter how much the world was telling him not to. The quiet stretched a little longer before Jenna spoke again, her voice softer now. "Will you bring him back on duty?" Ethan looked at Axel, now curled up on the rug, eyes half closed, completely at peace. He shook his head. "No. This was his last run. He's done more than enough for one lifetime." Axel might not have understood the words, but when Ethan sat down beside him, leaning back in the chair, the dog scooted closer, resting his head on Ethan's leg, a silent thank you. Sometimes, what holds a system together isn't laws. It's not weapons, not power. It's a nose, an instinct, and a trust that never wavers. Sometimes, in a world full of chaos and doubt, what keeps everything from falling apart isn't a perfectly built system. It's a quiet bond between a person and a creature that never betrays. Axel's story isn't just about a K9 who saved lives in a split second. It's a reminder that trust, when placed in the right hands, or pause, can change the course of a life. or even an entire case. While people hesitated, argued, and second-guessed, Axel acted, not for orders, not for medals, but because it was the right thing to do. The lesson here isn't about drama, it's about consistency, instinct, and a bond that doesn't need words. Some things can't be replaced by machines. Some moments can only be saved by pure, unwavering loyalty. If you've ever loved a dog, ever seen it look at you like you're the center of the universe, you'll understand why this story isn't just about a mission. It's proof that unconditional love can be stronger than anything else. Now imagine it was you in that situation. Would you have trusted a dog when everything and everyone else had doubts? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your story about the times you were saved by a heart that just wanted to protect you. And if you believe this story deserves to be shared, hit subscribe to Dog Stories right now. Here you'll always find heartwarming, powerful, and inspiring stories about four-legged heroes. Not flashy, just quietly extraordinary. We're back every week with new videos. Don't forget to hit the bell so you never miss a moment. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next story, where loyalty is always written in the quietest paw prints.